You're listening to Uncle Josh's True Scary Stories.
I was abducted by my throwaway 999. This happened to me from age 6 through about my mid-30s. My first encounter was around age 6, and I woke up to what you would call a gray in a shared bedroom with my two siblings who slept through it. I startled the creature, and it glided or ran down the hallway and then ran through my parents' closed bedroom door. I opened the door, and it wasn't in the room. It had vanished. Nobody else saw this encounter. I had many additional encounters in the years to follow, too, and I've never spoken publicly for fear of ridicule. Through my teenage years, I don't remember any specific events, but the next specific memories were around age 25 when I moved into a third-floor apartment, the top floor. I remember the sound of the tiny shuffling feet coming down the hallway, and then being completely unable to move. They came into my room and surrounded my bed. 4 or 5 smaller grays and then 1 or 2 taller ones who seemed to be directing the operation. There was no verbal interaction, but they made a sound like a clicking noise, which I assumed was them speaking to one another. They would touch a metal rod to my shoulder, and I would black out. Usually, I would wake up about 8 or 10 hours later, and sometimes as much as 24 hours later. Once, I woke up locked outside on my back porch in my underwear at 2 in the morning, with no memory of what happened during that time. So my reaction at the time was of course terror, but also anger. I wanted to catch these buggers in the act, so I set up IR alarms that would make a loud noise if anyone walked through the beam, and they were never triggered. One time, I strung a wire at ankle level across the hallway to trip anyone that didn't know it was there. I heard the shuffling feet approaching, then the sound of 5 or 6 creatures tumbling and falling on top of each other. A few seconds later, they burst into my room, and they were pissed off. Zapped me unconscious immediately. Even now, I'm trying to remember everything as I type this. For a while, I was in a support group online, and we shared abduction stories. But other than that, I haven't spoken about this publicly, even to my wife. Around age 30, I moved out of my apartment and back into my parents' house, some financial issues, and I thought the encounters would stop. They didn't, but they did change quite a bit. At my parents' house, I was in a room on the first floor, and everyone else was upstairs. There were hardwood floors in the upstairs, and almost immediately upon moving back home in the middle of the night, I was awoken by the sound of what sounded like dozens of clawed feet shuffling on the wooden floors. At the same time, an eerie blue light filled the house, shining under the closed door, and there was a weird electrical buzzing sound. I remember the first time this happened, I reached for the door, and it was like someone shouting in my head, "Go to sleep!" I went immediately to sleep, and I don't recall anything after that. But I do recall numerous additional times when I woke to 1 or more of them standing over my bed, or just waking up to the blue light, but nothing specific. A few years later, I'm guessing around my mid-30s, I got my act together and moved back out. I rented the 2nd floor of a house, and another guy had the 3rd floor. We shared a 1st-floor kitchen and common area, and again I have numerous recollections of waking up to a blue light filling the room, and occasionally seeing them standing over me. Somewhere in this period, I believe they may have placed an implant in my leg. I woke up with an unexplained scar and all the hair shaved from one shin. About a year later, I woke up to them standing around me and remember the thought was projected to me, "We're going to take it out now," and then I went unconscious. My upstairs roommate commented me that one time he woke up and walked past my closed door, and he confirmed there was a blue light coming out from the edges of my door. A Horrifying, Unforgettable Week by Polexia. I'd moved to Texas to live with my mom during my first pregnancy, since I had no support system in my hometown. I lived with her for about a year before the issues started up. It was around 9 o'clock at night, and my mom, stepfather and I were at the dining room table, and I had my 6-month-old son on my lap. He was refusing to sleep, and I didn't want to wake up my step-siblings by fussing loudly in my room, which was across the hall from the kids' rooms, and he was a very loud child when he was unhappy. So I figured him being with me would help him calm down enough to sleep. All of a sudden, he just froze in my lap, stiff as a board, and stared at the corner of the living room. I noticed he wasn't fidgeting anymore and followed his gaze, but nothing was there. It was just an empty corner. I got my mom's attention, and she looked at the corner as well, but she didn't see anything there either. My 6-month-old son started pointing at the corner, crying quietly, and my mom walked across the room, ran her hand around the corner but felt nothing, and came back. Within moments, my son stopped staring and leaned against my chest, falling asleep in just a few minutes. I laid him down in his crib, turned on some music, and left him there until I was ready to go to bed myself. I thought nothing of the shadows I saw moving in the hall through the crack between the bottom of my door and the floor, assuming they were just my stepfather checking in on his kids. 2 days later, it happened again, but this time my son's crying wasn't quiet. My mom checked the corner, and my son finally fell asleep, still sniffling, and I put him to bed. I went out onto the back deck for a cigarette around 10:30 before I headed for bed, and when I came back inside, my stepfather, we'll call him Dale, stopped me and said, "He's okay, but who's that woman?" "What woman?" I asked, because I couldn't see anyone near my room, and there were no new photos on the walls. "The woman there, in front of your door. She's got short curly hair. She's short and skinny, wearing a button-down shirt and a long jean skirt." "Dale," I said, "you drunk? There's no one there." But I did know that description. It was exactly how my grandmother looked when she was younger, and he had never met her. She died almost 2 years before this point, and I chalked it up to him, as I said, being drunk and maybe remembering a description my mother might have told him. The next 3 nights went much the same. We lost the house within the next month due to my stepfather not being able to work because of a car accident, so my mom and Dale took the kids an hour and a half away to stay with Dale's parents, while my son and I stayed behind to finish packing up the house. It was the easiest for all of us. Mom and Dale could focus on the kids and finding a new place, and I could focus on my son and packing without having to deal with the fuss that comes with 3 kids all close in age and reaching the point where they rarely got along. The first night was fine. I got the kids' belongings in boxes, and half of my room was organized and ready to be packed. The second evening is when it started. I had just laid my son down in bed, gotten the Disney station started up for him, and shut the door behind me when I heard the whispering. I opened my door again, but all I could hear was colors of the wind. The whispering got louder when I reached the living room. It seemed to come from what was my mom's room, and I hurriedly shut the door, turned on Alfred Hitchcock Presents on the television, and forced myself to focus on packing things up. I eventually fell asleep on the couch around 1 a.m. The next night, I was smoking before bed and on the phone with my friend, we'll call Brian, talking about nothing in particular. I fell silent as I realized there were 4 dark figures standing in the backyard, halfway between the deck and the back fence. They didn't move at all, but they were there. I took a picture on my phone, but the phone didn't show anything. I went inside, made sure all doors and windows were locked, and broke my own rule of smoking in the house. I didn't go back outside until the sun was up, and once I finally fell asleep, it didn't last long. I woke up to the feeling of someone watching me, and the hairs on the back of my neck standing straight up, and goosebumps all over my body. The music came the following night. Big band, 50s-style music, crackling and fluctuating in volume and eerily haunting, coming from my mom's room. My son wouldn't sleep in our room, screeching every time I tried to lay him down, so I made him a bed of extra comforters in the living room floor. He was asleep within minutes. I ignored the music as much as I could, but it was difficult. It played for 3 hours before suddenly cutting off, leaving the house in silence. But the figures in the backyard were there again. The 5th night I stayed in that house alone was also the final night. I'd become accustomed to the haunting strains of old music, the terrifying shadows in the backyard, the faint whispering, even the feeling of something being in the house with my son and me. But nothing could ever have prepared me for what happened that final night. I made sure the dishes were washed and put away, laundry run through the machines, folded and put away in boxes, and the trash was bagged up and ready to be put in the cans outside. I fell asleep to the sound of Alfred Hitchcock talking on the TV, the 50s music coming from my mom's room, and soft voices speaking too fast and too quietly for me to understand. I woke up in less than 2 hours, unable to breathe. It felt like I was being strangled, thick fingers around my throat, and a harsh, growling breathing in my ears. I was sobbing. My son was screaming, and I couldn't move. The sensation was gone as suddenly as it had come, and I stumbled to my feet, picked up my son to comfort him, and headed into the kitchen for a drink. I know I had put away every single dish and piece of silverware because I sent my mom a picture when I was done with the caption of, "See, Mom, I'm not being lazy." But there, on the island counter, was our largest butcher knife, and as I stared at it, it started almost vibrating, wiggling across the countertop before rising about an inch in the air. I screamed and ran back into the living room, stuffing my son rather haphazardly into his car seat before returning to my room to gather up clothes and drag his mattress from the crib. I shoved bottles and formula and diapers and wipes into a large duffel bag, the clothes into my book bag, and left it by the door while I ran my son out to the car as a guttural laugh echoed throughout the house. I nearly wrecked the car trying to reverse out of the driveway. I called my mom as I drove towards where they were staying, asking for directions and crying too hard to explain what happened. My phone died before I was even halfway there. Dale's mom didn't believe me when I got there, but I know Mom and Dale did. They'd seen the benevolent stuff, the less frightening occurrences, and so it wasn't a far leap from just presences to what I experienced that night. When I went to show them the pictures and let them listen to the audio of the music from their room, everything was gone. I mean, not just deleted or silent audio clips. The data wasn't there at all. The last I heard, the people who moved in after us left the house in just as much of a hurry as I did that night, and the neighbor across the street went in to clean it up and probably take things that were left behind, but couldn't even get past the front door before she felt like she was being strangled. Now the land has an enormous crack through it, and the house was in ruins for over a year before the city decided to tear it down.